Let's begin in Israel, where there's been a deadly highway shooting. The gunman opened fire on vehicles south of Tel Aviv, killing a policeman and wounding 4 others. The Israeli ambulance service says the shooting occurred on Route 4, which is a main road in Israel, which is usually very busy. According to Israeli police spokesperson, the unidentified shooter was shot by an Israeli citizen. Authorities are now investigating that incident. Let's now talk to VOA's Linda Gratstein. She is in Jerusalem. Thank you very much for joining us on The World Today, Linda.
Sure.
Have there been more details about this gunman in the shooting of Israeli policemen and others?
Yes. So his name is Mohammed Darduna. He's 28 years old. He entered Israel illegally from the West Bank. He was apparently originally from Jabalia in the Gaza Strip, but moved to the West Bank several years ago. And he did not have any kind of a criminal record and had not been involved in any sort of security incidents before this. But this is the 4th shooting attack inside Israel in the past 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, 7 people were killed in Jaffa when 2 gunmen opened fire. So there's definitely been an increase in these kind of terrorist attacks.
So do we know, as you said, if it was a terror-related attack? Because we hear the police addressing the shooter as a terrorist.
Yes, well, apparently he came to the highway. He was walking on foot, and one of the policemen who was parked by the side of the road found it a little bit suspicious that there would be somebody walking on the highway. So he called him over for a security check, and then he opened fire and, killed the policeman, and then opened fire on just cars that were driving by, wounding the 4 people, including a doctor who stopped to help some of the victims. And then he was killed by an Israeli civilian, a volunteer medic, who he fired at his car and then missed. And the medic, stopped his car, jumped out and shot him, and apparently had received his handgun permit just 3 months earlier. And Israel's national security minister, the hardline Itamar Ben-Gvir, said that the rules that he had put in place to give more civilians guns had saved people's lives today, because the attacker was shot before he could kill anybody besides the policeman.
Has there been any more information as to the motive of this shooting? Many wonder if it was a strategic or even a targeted one.
No, there hasn't been any information about it, but it seems that it's a reaction to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and/or Israel's incursion into Lebanon over the past few weeks. But in Gaza, there has been an increasing humanitarian crisis. The UN has said that they haven't been able to get aid to most people in northern Gaza. And there really is fears that the situation is becoming desperate for the people in Gaza. And over the past year, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, more than 42,000 people have been killed. Now, they don't distinguish between gunmen and civilians. Israel says it killed about 17,000 gunmen. That means more than 20,000, civilians have been killed in this ongoing conflict. So, I know there's a lot of anger among both, Palestinians in the West Bank and, who feel that the international community is not doing enough to stop the Israeli attacks in Gaza. Israel, of course, says that it's doing everything it can to avoid harm to civilians, but Gaza is so densely populated that it's impossible to avoid hitting civilians as they, continue their attacks on Hamas, which started the war on October 7th, just over a year ago.
Linda, this is a very busy highway. Commuters use that highway every day. What has been some of the reactions, for example, from people? And from what you know in the past, are these kinds of shooting a usual occurrence in Israel, or is this just a one-off thing?
Well, as I said, it's the 4th terrorist attack in 2 weeks. And it's almost impossible to stop lone attackers. Somebody who decides for whatever reason, to carry out one of these attacks. It's very hard. And Israel says that it stops many other attacks that are planned using intelligence and using, checkpoints that they just set up and stop cars and things like that. But I think it definitely increases this feeling of uncertainty where people feel like they just, they don't really feel safe. And they, in some ways, depending on where you live, many Israelis haven't felt safe since October 7th. When Hamas, thousands of gunmen came into Israel, took over about 24 communities near the border with Gaza. The next day, Hezbollah started firing at northern Israel, and something like 63,000 people had to leave their homes. And now, since the Israeli incursion, there's daily rocket fire on northern Israel. People are having to go into shelters all the time. And then if you feel like, you're on a highway in central Israel, this isn't the West Bank, this isn't Gaza, this isn't the Lebanon border, this is, maybe 40 minutes south of Tel Aviv, Israel's, commercial capital, and you're not safe, I think it does make people have a sort of feeling of lack of safety and just uncertainty about what the future is going to hold as the war goes on, and more Palestinians are just very, very angry and decide to kind of, take matters into their own hands.
All right. Thank you very much, viewers. Linda Gresson, thanks a lot for your time on The World Today, and please stay safe.
Thank you.
To other stories, there's still been no comment from Hezbollah after the Israeli army exposed what it said was a Hezbollah underground compound in southern Lebanon. It was discovered in a Lebanese house in Shia village, a few kilometers from the Israeli border. According to the Israeli army spokesperson Daniel Hagari, the 800-meter-long compound was intended for Hezbollah to do a larger scale of massacre than that of October the 7th.
We're now in the bunker that we found underneath a Lebanese house in a Shia village only a couple of kilometers from our border. This bunker was ready for Radwan forces, for a battalion of Radwan forces to enter into this bunker and do a raid into Israel and do a larger scale of massacre than the 7th of October. They were planned with the motorcycles here to go to Kiryat Shmona, to Iftach, to villages and positions inside Israel and conduct a massacre. And all our enemies should know, whether they are close or far away in Iran, they should know that we are determined. We are determined to supply security and safety to our citizens. We need to impose a 1701, a fully imposed 1701, this area, so Hezbollah can never be next to our border with such infrastructures that can do a Conquer Galilee plan like he planned. Hassan Nasrallah, this ruthless terrorist that we eliminated, that is responsible for the deaths of many people, not just Israelis, Germans, Americans, French, and others. The world is a better place without Hezbollah. The world is a better place without Nasrallah.
Israel is now expanding its offensive against Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon as fighting continues there. But 4 people were killed in southern Lebanon, while the Lebanese Health Ministry says that at least 21 people have been killed in a rare Israeli strike in the north of the country. Millions of Israelis took shelter from projectiles fired back across the border. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, says in a briefing that it hit more than 230 targets in southern Lebanon and in Gaza in the past day. The United Nations has announced that its peacekeepers will not withdraw from southern Lebanon, but they will stay in their positions despite Israel's repeated calls for them to leave combat zones. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the stance that Israelis deliberately attacked the United Nations interim force in Lebanon and not true. He says that there were multiple warnings and calls for peacekeepers to get out of harm's way, reiterating that Israel is not fighting the people of Lebanon.
The charge that Israel deliberately attacked UNIFIL personnel is completely false. It's exactly the opposite. Israel repeatedly asked UNIFIL to get out of harm's way. It repeatedly asked them to temporarily leave the combat zone, which is right next to Israel's border with Lebanon. In fact, on the day that Israel began its ground operation next to our border with Lebanon, We asked them specifically, please leave this area so you're not harmed. Israel is not fighting UNIFIL. It's not fighting the people of Lebanon. It is fighting Iran's proxy Hezbollah, which uses Lebanese territory to attack Israel. Hezbollah attacked Israel last year without any provocation on October 8th, a day after the Hamas massacre. And it's continued to attack us ever since by launching over 10,000 rockets and missiles at Israel. Hezbollah uses UNIFIL facilities and positions as cover while it attacks Israeli cities and communities. These attacks have claimed the lives of many Israelis, including yesterday. Israel has every right to defend itself against Hezbollah and will continue to do so. We regret any harm done to UNIFIL personnel, and the IDF is doing its utmost to prevent such incidents. But the best way to ensure the safety of UNIFIL personnel is for UNIFIL to heed Israel's request and to temporarily get out of harm's way.
Meanwhile, Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer said that the United Nations peacekeeping deployment in Lebanon has been a lack of success. Speaking at a press conference in Jerusalem, Mr. Mencer said that UNFIL's refusal to redeploy poses a great danger to both the United Nations and Israeli soldiers.
UNIFIL's deployment has been an utter failure, unfortunately, since 2006. Under the watchful eye, we wish, of these so-called peacekeepers, again, we wish they were peacekeepers. Since October the 8th last year, the Hezbollah terror organization has been attacking Israel without any provocation. 13,000 incessant firing of rockets, missiles and drones. Why? To kill Israelis, to impose terror and disrupt the daily life here in Israel. So UNIFIL's refusal to redeploy endangers both the UN and Israeli soldiers. Our defense minister has made clear that all the while Israel will maintain coordination with UNIFIL. The Prime Minister has made clear that that their deployment was not fit for purpose in implementing UN Resolution 1701. They had not kept Hezbollah from our border. In fact, the opposite. Hezbollah has embedded more tunnels, more arms, more weapons right under their noses, sometimes within eyeshot, sometimes under 100 meters away. The IDF actually cites 25 cases where attacks on Israel came from close by UNIFIL positions.
The spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Stefan Dujarric, says that Mr. Guterres has condemned the large number of civilian casualties in intensifying Israeli campaign in northern Gaza. Speaking at a press conference in New York, he said the UN was very aware of very disturbing reports about Israeli attacks on a hospital complex in Gaza.
We are aware of very disturbing reports about an Israeli attack on the grounds of a hospital complex in central Gaza. The Secretary General condemns the large number of civilian casualties in the intensifying Israeli campaign in northern Gaza, including its schools displacing sheltered Palestinian civilians. He strongly urges the parties to the conflict, all parties to the conflict, to comply with international humanitarian law and emphasizes that civilians must be respected and protected at all times. Humanitarian assistance into Gaza is woefully inadequate and is at the lowest level in months.
Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel has joined calls for peace in the Gaza Strip. He led a pro-Palestinian demonstration in the capital, Havana, on Monday. His presence there boosted the morale of other protesters who said that Cuba is always on the side of the Palestinian people and that amidst the indiscriminate bombings, the damage to schools, damage to hospitals, Cuba has asked for an end to this genocide. Staying with the protests, this time in the United States, more than 200 pro-Palestinian demonstrators staged a sitting outside the New York Stock Exchange demanding an end to U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza. Many of them were from activist groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace. None of them got inside the stock exchange, but dozens crossed the police security fence set up outside its main building on Broad Street. The police reportedly made over 200 arrests as the protest surged.